In this book, Trump gets mentioned every now and again. Do we think he's gonna win? Put it down in the comments if you think he's gonna win. It's a fake trial. It's a fake trial. This is kangaroo court. That wasn't actually that bad, I think. We're doing International Booker again. This is book 4 on the shortlist for my reviews. And this book is What I'd Rather Not Think About. Is that the title? I always fuck it up. This book is about a woman's reaction to her brother's suicide. And the whole book is in the structure of anecdotes. So small anecdotes, some 2 or 3 pages, some less than a page, just sort of put next to each other. And they form a vague kind of chronology of a woman as the suicide happens and then she comes to kind of cope with it. And throughout all that, there are like funny anecdotes, there are sad ones, and it's all kind of revolving around her brother, who is clearly quite depressed and who is kind of gearing towards that. I should start by just saying I don't know if the book is real or not. I don't know how much of it is embellished or just not true. I've seen some Goodreads reviews say that it's not true. I've seen some people say that it is true, so I actually don't know, and I have not put in the research, because ultimately to me it doesn't matter. Because if it is true, it's very sad, and if it isn't true, I feel like the author has done a really great job into getting into the head of someone who has this event happen to them and showing it in a haphazard way where memories come in out of nowhere and showing fluctuation in emotions that are outside of the typical stages of grief. And it's what I would expect from someone with proximity to that topic, even though it might not necessarily be the same series of events that they experienced. So I thought that the author did a really good job with this book, whether or not it's true, so it doesn't really matter to me. So the narrator of this book is a woman, and she gets married throughout the course of the book, and she's very depressed, and she's also very nihilistic, and she holds a lot of things at arm's length. She holds her family at arm's length. She treats her husband kind of like shit at points, and I appreciated that that was said with sort of an equal level of candor throughout the book. And I've seen people criticize this book's use of the Holocaust and 9/11 in its anecdotes. Like, the narrator will mention Auschwitz and Josef Mengele and people like that, and also talk about 9/11 and the Twin Towers and so on. And I agree that it's kind of unsubtle and cringe, but I also think that the narrator shows awareness at points in the book that what they are doing is tasteless and it is exploitative, and they feel bad for using the Holocaust and 9/11 to try and connect and understand their own tragedy. And I got glimpses of that throughout the book that made me forgive it. Like, I understood that the narrator was kind of aware that they were being a bad person and doing that, or doing a bad thing. So people who criticize that, I don't entirely agree. I also like that the narrator is aware of their own misgivings and their kind of failures generally outside of that. And it's not like Undiscovered, where the narrator of Undiscovered has to constantly say, oh, I'm a bad person, oh, I'm not decolonized yet, oh, I'm such a terrible person, I'm so bad for cheating on my husband and wife, like, shut the fuck up. But with this book, it's the self-loathing was more subtle and more baked into the character itself. This author knows she doesn't have to say that for the reader to understand that the narrator has these misgivings about people and has these kind of unreliabilities to them. For example, and this is a moment I noted down because I really liked it, the brother goes up to the sister and tells her, we have to kind of be separate for a little bit. And the narrator asks, did your boyfriend put you up to this, to the brother? And the narrator says, and this is direct quotes, according to my brother, Sue Yan had nothing to do with it. And the wording of that sentence was like the most paranoid rendition of that sentence and that moment and that bit of dialogue. Like, if she had said, the brother, in quotations, Sue Yan had nothing to do with it, you wouldn't be thinking that the narrator believed that or had misgivings about it. But the fact that she says, according to my brother, means that she thinks that the brother is doing that, or that he was put up to it, you know what I mean? So the paranoia of the character and the kind of unlikability of her comes through in subtle shades as well, and I really did like that, and it made the book more interesting to read into in certain ways, and read into it as a possible unreliable narrator at points. The subtlety does come from interpersonal relationships. It's not particularly subtle when it comes to analogies. For example, I'm just looking at notes I've written down. There's an example where she makes reference to a volcano that's dormant, but it could erupt at any minute when she's looking on the news. And I was like, yeah, unsubtle, that's referring to the brother, of course it is. And she talks about Auschwitz, and she's like, how did these people from Auschwitz, how were they able to cope after the event, whereas my brother couldn't cope with his life? And I was like, you know, like, it's unsubtle. It's not very subtle or nuanced or smart, but there is subtlety in the book, and I like the chaos of jumping between those, where you jump from an unsubtle analogy of just her watching the news to a more subtle moment between characters where you kind of feel history between them. And again, it feels like this haphazard moment where the author is throwing everything down on the paper and trying to process it. I do like the subtle background, for example, with the narrator and her parents, where you kind of get a background of like ever so slight neglect or ever so slight indifference. And again, this is through the head of the narrator, so it's possible that they were good parents, but there are anecdotes where they come in and you get the feeling that they're not amazing parents, but then you go, why am I thinking that? What part of this is making me think that? And it's because of how the narrator is interpreting things. So I like the subtlety there. Another example is like the narrator will give a potential reason for the brother's suicide. Like they'll connect to things in the past, like when their brother was bullied or whatever, and whenever that happened, they would just leave the reason sitting there. They would not try and connect it with the suicide. They would just end the anecdote with you thinking, is this a potential reason in the narrator's head for why the brother killed himself? And that's, I did like that because it does happen a lot, and at the end you can tell the narrator is not sure why the brother killed himself, where the depression really stems from, what was its like main, like crucial functional cause, and she will never know. And it's quite sad, but I appreciate the way that the book showed that by throwing reasons at you and then not kind of connecting them really deliberately, because you can tell the narrator is thinking it but doesn't want to say it, what she'd rather not think about. Some of the anecdotes I liked the most in the book were ones that had nothing to do with the actual suicide event itself or the narrator. For example, there's one moment where she's talking about a mouse that was running around in her brother's house, and that was like my favorite moment in the book, and there was no reason for it to be any better than anything else, but it just came to me as being really subtle and funny and almost like a really short story. And there's a lot of the book that's like that, these really interesting anecdotes. There was also a really compelling series of anecdotes just after the economic crash in 9/11, where the narrator moves in with her auntie and her store closes, so she gets a huge sort of stack of clothes that sit on the windowsill, and it was just like a really interesting sort of evocative moment that showed time and place really well. And again, not necessarily relevant to the suicide of the brother in that sense. But again, when she's throwing everything down on the page, some of it is going to be great that isn't necessarily connected with a really sort of tangible thread, you know what I mean? I still have some criticisms for the book that function as just criticisms though. For example, the way the suicide is used in the book is an event that is built up to. Like, the narrator will reference the fact that her brother kills himself in the first half of the book before it happens, but she'll reference in like a, this is gonna happen at some point, this is gonna happen, and it made that feel like an event that was going to happen in the book, and then it does happen as an event, but then everything after the suicide kind of feels the same. It's tonally identical. It's identical in terms of anecdote, like there's no new anecdotes introduced at that point in time, and because of the way the narrator processes it, it feels like the suicide could have just not happened in the book, or could have been at the beginning of the book or the end of the book, and it would not change the formatting, the anecdote order, or the narrator's kind of headspace. It feels like she feels the same at the beginning and she feels the same at the end, and that's what clues me into the idea that she's writing all of this after the fact, and that is clearly probably the case. But the fact that she does that and then makes the suicide an event in the book made me kind of confused about why certain things were at certain points in the book and not others, why we were treating the suicide as a thing that happens, and then, so it's like, narrator is worried, event happens, narrator is grieving, but it doesn't function in that order. That's the order that the book implies from the use of an event for the suicide, but then the narrator is kind of just grieving the whole time, or is kind of confused the whole time, and the anecdotes about the Holocaust are still at the end, and there's anecdotes about a bunch of other bullshit at the end too, and at the beginning. So there's no real sense of order to the book, and that chaos can feel good at points when you read a bad anecdote and then you go to a good one, but on a broader scale, I don't particularly like it, and I feel like it would be better if we just treated the suicide as something that had already happened in the book. And again, I like her sort of emotionless reaction to that in theory, because again, it's the narrator voice, it's quite unreliable, and her connecting it to the Holocaust and 9/11 is again a sense of process. I found this book chaotic, unstructured, but still very interesting and with a capacity for self-awareness. I thought that the patchiness of this book was intentional, and I really loved some of it. individually. I really loved individual anecdotes, and I really loved what the book was saying, especially by the end. I thought it was quite an emotional book. It was quite moving, and I thought it succeeded pretty much most of the time at what it was attempting to do. So I really liked the book. I would give it between a 6 or a 7, leaning closer to a 7. Currently, I think it's second place in my ranking of the shortlist. So yeah, pretty good book. I'm glad it's on there. It's not too bad. It's better than fucking Undiscovered, and pretty much everything is. So thank you all. The next review will probably be for Kairos, and then after that I'll read the details last, and then it's the winner announcement. So thank you all so much. I hope you're enjoying these reviews, and more to come. Bye!